Hi everyone, today's recap is about a new science fiction movie that will blow your mind. This video has spoilers, so watch at your own risk. Let's dive in. A lone starship, the Avalon, glides through the vastness of space, bound for a new world called Homestead 2. Inside, all is silent and dark, except for the faint hum of the autopilot. The 258 crew members and the 5,000 passengers are sleeping in their hibernation pods, unaware of the passage of time. But then, the ship encounters a field of asteroids that batter its shields and damage its systems. The ship tries to divert power to the main shield, but it is too late. A massive asteroid slams into the ship, causing sparks and explosions. The ship activates its self-repair protocols, but something else happens. One of the hibernation pods opens, releasing a man. His name is Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. He wakes up, groggy and confused, and follows the automated voice that guides him through his awakening process. It tells him that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years and that the ship is only 4 months away from Homestead 2. It tells him that he can enjoy the luxury amenities of the ship until then. Jim gets his ID band, his cabin, and his schedule of activities and prepares to meet his fellow travelers. He leaves his cabin and enters an automated classroom where a hologram lectures him about the situation on Earth, calling it overcrowded, overpriced, and overrated. It asks him to save his questions for the end of the lesson, but Jim keeps interrupting, asking why he is the only one there. He realizes that the hologram cannot answer him and decides to look for other people. He walks to the main concourse of the ship, but it is empty and deserted. He finds an automated information desk and asks to talk to a real person. It directs him to a steward, but when he gets there, he finds no one. He asks to speak to the captain and heads to the bridge, but he cannot enter, and he sees that the crew is still asleep. He goes to the observatory, where he discovers the shocking truth. The ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2. He has woken up too soon, and he has no way to go back to sleep. He rushes back to the concourse and sends a message to Earth, asking for help. The communication system informs him that the expensive call to Earth will take 55 years to get a reply. Jim is horrified. He wanders around the ship and stumbles upon the ship's bar, where he sees another person. He starts talking to him, but something feels off. When he goes to get him a drink, he realizes that he is an android. His name is Arthur. Jim tries to get some information from him, but he cannot explain to the android how he ended up there. Jim wakes up in his cabin the next day and goes to the cantina, where he learns that most of the items on the menu are reserved for gold-class passengers only. He gets his plain coffee and tries to figure out how to fix his hibernation pod. He gathers all the tools he can find and manages to get it working and lies down inside. But nothing happens. He tries to break into the crew's hibernation pods, but that fails too. The ship starts to show signs of malfunction. Jim keeps going back to the bar to drink and to talk to Arthur. The android gives him some advice that persuades him to sneak into one of the gold classrooms and try to have some fun on the ship. Jim tries all the restaurants, the games, the entertainment system. But as time goes by, he becomes more and more lonely and depressed. He had lost all hope and drowned his sorrows in alcohol, wandering aimlessly among the sleeping passengers. He stumbled into a chamber with spacesuits and a hatch that led to the void. He put on a suit and opened the hatch, feeling a rush of cold air. He stepped out of the ship and gazed at the stars. He was the only living soul in this vast emptiness. He detached himself from the ship and floated in space, feeling nothing but despair. He returned to the ship, took off the suit, but went back to the hatch without it. He pulled the lever, ready to embrace death, but hesitated at the last moment, ran back to the ship, and tripped over a bottle. He got up and saw her face in one of the pods, a woman named Aurora. He searched for her information in the database and listened to her voice, feeling a spark of interest. He spent hours by her pod, listening to her stories. He went to the bar and read some of her books, talking to Arthur about her talent. He was tormented by the irony of his fate, leaving Earth for a new life, waking up too soon and never reaching it, and finding his soulmate, only to be separated by a glass wall. He couldn't stop thinking about her and started to consider waking her up. He discussed it with the android, but he couldn't comprehend the dilemma. If he woke her up for his own sake, he would doom her to his fate, to die on the ship. He resisted the temptation at first, but as time passed he couldn't hold it back. One day, he made up his mind. He went to her pod and hacked it. As she was coming out of hibernation and going through the same shock as he did, he hid and went back to his room. A little later he went to the main hall, hoping to meet her. And there she was, just as bewildered as he was a year ago. He told her they were the only ones awake and took her to the observatory. Then he told her that he couldn't contact the crew or the ship's controls. Aurora panicked and wanted to go back to her pod. When they got there, Jim told her that there was no way to put them back to sleep, effectively telling her that they were trapped. They went back to the hall and he told her that she should rest since she just came out of hibernation. She felt pity for him, having to endure more than a year of solitude. Jim went back to the bar, feeling guilty about what he did. He asked Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one that woke her up. The next day, Aurora woke up. She went back to the hall and asked the automated desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joined her there, and they went to get breakfast. As they left, the desk malfunctioned. In the cafeteria, Aurora noticed that Jim had been eating the same breakfast for more than a year and got him a deluxe menu. They talked about the possibility to fix the pods, but, unlike Jim, Aurora didn't give up. She searched through the medical bay, then went through the research papers, eventually ending up at the crew's quarters trying to break the doors open. Jim noticed more glitches throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora mourned her life on the Avalon. She wrote, ran around the ship and swam in the pool, becoming more and more conscious of her predicament. She went to the cantina to question Jim, thinking that his story might be intriguing. She asked why he left Earth for the colony. Jim replied with the company's propaganda first, but then revealed that he hoped that on the new world he could be someone. He could create a life. Later, they ended up in the observatory and Aurora finally confessed her reason to be there. Unlike the other passengers on the ship, she had a return ticket. Her plan was to go to Homestead 2, stay there for a year, and come back to Earth to become the first journalist that had ever done that, writing the ultimate story that ever was. Aurora gradually abandoned her hope of finding a way to fix their current situation, and Jim devised a way to cheer her up. He took her dancing, to the cinema, and to the basketball court. Lastly, he took her to the bar to meet Arthur. She relaxed for a bit, until she remembered their plight. Jim was left alone with the android, feeling terrible about what he had done to her. The next moment, he was seen working on something, and in the other Aurora walked into the observatory to find a replica of the Chrysler building he made for her. Sometime later, they went on a date at the bar. They had dinner and exchanged stories about their lives. She told him that her father died when she was a teenager. After the dinner, Jim took Aurora to the hatch and they got into the spacesuits. They went out for a spacewalk together. Jim finally had someone to share that amazing experience with. Jim turned off the magnets on their boots and they floated together in space. They came back inside and instantly kissed, retreated to his cabin, and slept together. Soon after, they started living like a couple. Aurora moved into his cabin and wrote about her life on the ship. They ran together, ate together, slept together. Jim explored the ship further and found the hydroponics bay. He brought Aurora flowers. One day the ship passed by a red giant and they went to the observatory to see it. It was Aurora's birthday, so later that night they celebrated it in one of the many restaurants on the ship and then the bar. Jim went to the washroom and prepared the ring he made for Aurora while she stayed in the bar chatting with Arthur. The android told Aurora that Jim woke her up deliberately, unaware that he was supposed to keep that a secret. Suddenly, Jim came back and she confronted him in utter shock. She ran away furious and terrified. Jim came back to his cabin to find all her things gone. He ran into her in the cantina the next day, but the moment he spoke, she ran away. Aurora was desperate. One night she went over to Jim's cabin, punching and kicking him, wanting to kill him. Talking to her over the comm because she kept avoiding him, Jim tried to apologize and explain his actions to her. He told her he fell in love with her, but Aurora didn't care. She couldn't forgive him for taking her life. One night, as Jim was in his cabin, another malfunction happened. The ship faced a critical error and the main command shut down. Later, he walked into the elevator and it malfunctioned. Aurora walked into the main hall and saw that Jim had planted a tree there. Then, she went to the cantina, where the food dispenser was also malfunctioning. They heard the voice of the deck chief over the comms, demanding to know who planted the tree. They rushed to the concourse and saw Gus Mancuso staring at Jim's tree. They introduced themselves and explained the situation to the chief. He was baffled by how 3 pods could fail. Mancuso took them to the bridge, and he detected that there was something wrong with the ship, but the information on the systems had to be verified manually. When they left the bridge, a robot nearly crashed on their heads, and they told Mancuso that malfunctions had been occurring all over the ship more often. He said that shouldn't happen, as he taught them how to collect the data. Mancuso inspected the pods when Jim joined him there. He had discovered what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief was appalled by what Jim did to her. Later, he was at the bridge analyzing the collected data when Aurora joined him. They talked about what happened with her pod, but he told her that he couldn't help her. Jim walked in with the 16th broken robot. Mancuso felt the hibernation sickness, so he went to rest, but as he walked out, he spat out blood. That night, Aurora couldn't sleep, so she went for a swim. Suddenly, there was gravity loss throughout the ship, and she started drowning as the water from the pool followed her. The gravity drive rebooted, and she barely escaped death. They both ran into each other going to find Mancuso. The three of them were back at the bridge, slowly uncovering what had been going on with the ship. Mancuso realized that something happened 2 years ago, taking out a major system. They had to find and fix what had caused the failure, because the entire ship was trying to compensate. If they didn't fix it, the whole vessel would be doomed. They went to find the problem, but Mancuso collapsed, so Jim and Aurora took him to the medical bay. He was dying and there were no treatments that could cure him or extend his life. Sometime later, the three of them met in the observatory and Mancuso gave Jim his ID bracelet, told them to fix the ship, and instantly died. Suddenly, the lights turned to a menacing red and the ship started trembling. Jim told Aurora that he needed her help and they ran toward engineering, but there was another failure in the gravity drive, and immediately another one that affected Arthur as well. Jim deactivated him. They reached engineering and started searching for the problem. They found it in the power plant, and as they opened the hatch, Aurora was pulled in. The asteroid had torn a hole in that area. Jim was pulled in too, but he clung to the hatch as it kept closing on him. Eventually he was pulled in too, but they managed to seal the hole. Right after fixing that problem, Jim realized that there was more than one hole in the hull. The two of them followed the path of the meteor and found that it had hit the reactor control computer. Jim thought he could find spare parts for it. They found the part and replaced it, but the process of venting the reactor still failed. They did it manually, but it failed again. Jim figured out that he had to open the vent door from outside of the ship so they could cool the reactor down. Both of them went to the hatch, and as he was getting ready to go out, he gave Aurora Mancuso's bracelet because he might not come back. She helped him with the suit, and as he walked into the hatch, she told him to come back because she couldn't survive on the ship without him. Aurora went back to the reactor, where the temperature had reached critical levels. A bolt from the reactor shot into her arm, as Jim was getting closer to the vent from the outside and saw the door. The temperature rose in the reactor room, while he was trying to override the vent door to open it. He soon realized that he had to manually hold the door open so the reactor could vent, and he told Aurora. She hated the plan, but he went ahead with it and told her to vent the reactor. She didn't want him to die and they fought, but he told her that they had to save the other people and she vented the reactor. The process was successful, but the gases from the reactor pushed Jim away and broke his tether. The pressure in his suit was dropping too. He told Aurora what happened and she moved as fast as she could to get to another suit and bring him in. He apologized to her again. She put on a suit and flew out to get him, but her tether was too short. She was pulled back, but suddenly grabbed onto his tether and managed to pull him in. Aurora dragged Jim into the medical bay, only to find out that he was already dead. She used Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical protocols and to resuscitate him. The medical pod did the work automatically and revived Jim. Aurora forgave him. Later, Aurora fixed Arthur and they gave Mancuso a proper space funeral. Jim took her to the medical bay and told her that he had found a way to use the medical pod as a hibernation one. He told her to get inside the pod and ride out the rest of the journey in there. But, as was later revealed, she refused and decided to stay with him, awake on the ship. Jim finally proposed to her and they lived out their lives on the ship. 88 years later, the Avalon arrived on Homestead 2. The crew woke up and found the ship in a very unexpected state. Aurora left them a message, retelling the story of the horror and the love her and Jim had on the ship while the rest were sleeping.